Okay, so what we are looking at doing today is obviously looking at covering learning outcome 3. And this learning outcome 3 that we're going to look at would primarily be focused on understanding the physical care needs of a child. Now, in the first unit, what we've done is essentially studied some part of the relevant theoretical frameworks and obviously what are the key basic requirements that we need to be aware of, specifically when we are working as an early years practitioner, with children, or I would say children between the age of, 0 to 7, and in some cases, classification being, when you have children joining actually nursery, and that would be between the age groups of 4 to 11. So here, in yesterday's learning outcome, just very briefly that we looked at, was to focus on understanding what could be the events and transitions which, children go through at this stage, at some stage during the course of their growth and development. And the key terms that we wanted to understand in learning outcome 2 were related to understanding what is transition and what is a event or a significant event. So transitions were things which are processes which children have to go through because of changes which are happening in the external environment, their personal life, parents having, and these changes could have some sort of lasting effect. And sometimes these transitions or changes do take a lot of time to happen. And that is where the early years practitioners, carers, parents, other authorities step in to be able to make that transition, or let's say, I want to use the word, switching over from one to the other possible. Events are events which are defined as something which leaves a lasting impression on the child's memory when they're growing up in the early years. This could be, say, for example, these are events which essentially can create trauma, anxiety, stress, or can have some sort of a long-term manifestation when the children grow up, if they've had different varying levels of trauma or events, significant events which have happened, and that has led to or created traumas, or, for example, stress or anxiety for children when they are growing up in the early years. Examples of this that we discussed was transition was a simple transition that we've all seen. And as kids, we've also gone through, is that if you change cities, your parents get, a different job, you move to a different school. Sometimes you would see a birth of another child or another sibling, which will happen. And in some cases, parents could, go through a divorce or things like that, and they would be termed as transitions because these are significant events and transitions which children go through. Now, when we differentiate between events and transitions, for events, we will look at events which could have a lasting memory, which could create a lasting memory specifically within children. And if they are not given professional help, understanding, and ability to be able to cope with those events, then it can have severe detrimental effects on the growth of children. So, for example, a bereavement in the family, we look at parents going through a divorce, which is a right example in the events case, or in certain cases, when we look at if they've had an accident or somebody very close to them has an accident, and that could be a life-threatening or life-changing event. And that is where we differentiate between transitions and, events. And that is what we went through yesterday in terms of our coverage, to understand some of the events, some of the transitions which are known to us, and how do we cope and how do we go through and help as early as practitioner in providing that support to family, to the child, and in some cases make available resources and information. So one of the websites that we looked at yesterday was the Young Children or Young Minds website. And that website provides a lot of resources to schools in particular when children are going through some of these events and transitions, or significant events and transitions. And in those cases, that government initiative allows, significant resources to be made available, not just to teachers, practitioners, carers, but anybody who's involved in the development of children in the early years between the age group of, I would say, 5 to 11 or 4 to 11. That's what we covered yesterday. In today's coverage on the learning outcome, what we are focused on essentially is to look at understanding the physical care needs of children. So one of the bits that we are going to study in terms of physical care needs for children is primarily going to be looking at, understanding what is required for their healthy development. And when we look at their requirements in terms of healthy development, we would basically be focused on, you know, physical needs. So in such cases, the idea would be to go into a bit more detail, and that would be to primarily understand, what would be the physical care needs that we need to provide as a practitioner for this, let's say, for children to be able to cope with some of the, activities and, let's say, situations that they are going through. So what we will do is start off with looking at, first of all, defining what would be, say, for example, the physical care needs. So when we talk about physical care needs in terms of children in particular, or say, for example, for a child, now they can be varied. And this will vary because depending on the age group that we look at when we talk about this, so from birth to the age of 2, or from 2 to 3 years, or 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7, or 5 to 11 years. Now, some of the physical care needs would be to teach them hygiene. So if I ask you to put on your thinking hat, and if you look at this from a point of view of what are the things that we need to teach children at the very young age, that they need to develop these as habits, and these would be things that will all fall into this particular pot that we are talking about, which is physical care needs. So things like, if you look at toilet training, sometimes it's also called potty training or toilet training. This is one of the things when children are weaning off and they are starting to go from breastfed milk, or milk in general, to solid foods. You would generally see weaning as a process would start. And what parents at some point in time would start to do would be to start looking at, first, in some cases, when you're a newborn, it is feeding on demand. But in some cases, after 6 to 8 months, and when your weaning for a particular child starts, what we start then look at is patterns in terms of when they will be, when they will receive a feed, or when they will essentially be looking at getting a combination of feed plus solid foods. So in those cases, what we will look at is at somewhere during the age, or I would say the age group of 6 to 9 months and above, what we start to do is we start looking after, or start to get sensitive about the physical care needs of the children. And they would include where they're trying to start to, I'll put it this way, when they start to balance and start to walk instead of crawl, they would need certain physical care in terms of making sure that the fall is softened. For example, they don't fall, they don't hurt themselves, they are getting used to their motor skills. And in those cases, they will try and experiment with picking up a lot of objects, playing with a lot of objects, putting everything into the mouth. At some point in time, when we look at babies between the age group of 9 months to a year, or 1.5 years, everything goes into their mouth. If you put them in a play area, you take them outside to a garden or an activity area, everything goes into the mouth. So in those cases, I think you can start to put on your thinking hat and see where are the physical care needs of those, when and how would be, and what would be the physical care needs of a child. So in such cases, we will look at things like, making sure that we are starting to ensure that they start washing hands, maybe at the age group of 3 to 5, or beyond. We would start to look at things like oral care, hygiene, personal hygiene, or toilet training, as we call it. And that would start with the early years, when we essentially look at children specifically around the area of physical or care needs. So there are lots of different things that we will look at. So for example, some of them that I've highlighted here, things like nappy change, toilet training, washing and bathing time, care of skin, teeth, and hair. Obviously, mothers, or in some cases, fathers, would brush, the child's hair twice a day or 3 times a day. You'll put some oil, massage the scalp, basic things which are required. And then slowly and gradually, the idea is to start getting them into what are called habits. And that is where the child then starts to fall into a bit of a routine. And as practitioners, when you work with children or take care of children in nursery, after school clubs, kindergarten, or early schools, when we talk about nurseries in particular, kids must feel safe and sound, and they should have that social bond and confidence on you that you are going to be able to provide them with their basic needs of helping them cope with a particular activity or an environment that they've been put in. And those are the bits that we are going to look at from an environmental perspective when we do broaden the discussion in terms of looking at talking about the physical care needs of a child. So in essence, understanding the physical care needs of children is important, and it is very essential because it allows us to delve into various aspects of, the well-being of a child. It includes making sure that they are getting a balanced nutrition, their hygiene and safety is taken care of, and obviously, if they need medical attention because of any particular reason or condition, then those things are also provided for and would be accounted for in the physical care, physical need or care of the child. And for this, what we need to be able to understand is, to a certain extent, you can relate this to, certain theoretical frameworks wherein when we in particular talk about Brenner's, economic ecological systems theory framework, he emphasized that the children's environment plays a very vital role in its development. And this is something that we have looked at in some of the theories that we talk about, like the Paget's theory, we talk about Ben Brommer's theory, and a couple of frameworks that we've looked at in the first learning outcome is where we try and then relate it to the theoretical part, which is to understand how some of these frameworks have been developed over the years and which of them practically relates to the physical care which is required, or physical care which is required to be provided to children to basically help them get into routine and habits and develop habits which will be useful for them as they grow up in the in their life, and obviously from a toddler to and let's say a toddler to an adult, adolescence to teenager to an adult. These transitions would happen, and obviously some of them, they will form the foundation of what they have learned or what they've been taught at the initial years to relate to what are called the physical care needs. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Now, one of the other things that we will also look at is, if I was to ask a basic question that, what could be why do you think children would need, physical care, or they would have needs essentially which are related to their physical care? So some of the reasons that come to your mind would be the fact that, one, the child or the age group in which the child is, they do not know what is good from bad, or they do not know right from wrong. So in such cases, they are curious and they are willing to experiment. And in those cases, what you have to do is care has to be provided, which would give them guidance in terms of how they would mitigate or stay away from certain circumstances which would create harmful conditions for them. And that is one of the reasons that you can think of when we look at putting them into, say, for example, we start developing habits wherein they start moving from a baby cot to a normal cot where they sleep. So sometimes you would still have, the sides pulled up so that the baby during the night when they roll up, what will happen is they'll not fall from the bed. So in such cases, this is something that you normally would have. And in some cases, you have different sizes and shapes of baby cots. So you have a newborn, and obviously baby cots can accommodate child from the age group of just after birth to the age of 2 years, 3 years. But after that, you need to move them to a bed. And one of the things they would look at would be, and as parents, you would look at is that how do we ensure that the child, when they're sleeping, you tuck them in. But if they roll about or move about during the course of the night, then you would prevent them from falling over from the bed on one of the sides. And what you do is you put those sides on to ensure that the child does not fall off from the bed during their sleep. And those would be things that, as parents, you would look at when we talk about physical care needs. When children start to go to nursery, or obviously start to go out and start playing in the activity areas, or when they become, they are able to crawl and they are able to stand and walk, and they are able to then, have the basic sense of understanding of playing with other siblings or other friends or, children, then in those cases, the physical care needs would mean that if you are an early years practitioner or a carer or somebody who looks after children, when they are doing that particular activity would be to look at chances of spread of infection. For example, if somebody's got cough and cold, or in some cases is showing symptoms of running a fever, then in those cases those children would need physical care. And that would mean that as carers, as practitioners, you'll be able to spot those symptoms, and they would then allow you to put the relevant steps or things into action so that care can be provided, and that could minimize in the long run the risk of infections, and obviously in some cases also limit the spread of the infection amongst other children if they are playing in an activity area, or specifically when we look at I would say children working in, or playing and mingling with other children in I would say activity areas, nurseries and schools in particular. Now, if we look at this particular learning outcome, we are going to be looking at two particular assessment criteria. One, we need to describe what are physical needs. So we can describe it from three aspects. One would be that we would describe the physical care needs of a child from a perspective of parent. We would look at it from a perspective of a carer, or other people, and in the other people we'll classify early years practitioners, teachers, nurses, or in some cases dinner ladies if they are going to a nursery, and in general other siblings, or other types of people they come in contact with when they are in the external environment. So, and the second part that we have to look at is what is that physical care which is required. So we'll go into some of the specifics of that by discussing examples of nappy training, toilet training, washing and bathing time, hair, skin and teeth, basic parts of it in terms of care for hair, teeth, and skin, and then obviously helping them develop a routine for eating meals, so that at some stage then relates to even toilet training, so they know that this is the time that they would be fed, and this is the time they would need to do away with nappies over a point in time. And that's what parents look at when we look at some of these activities. There could be other activities that we could plan as early as practitioners, specifically when you're out and about and we are dealing with children in a higher age group of 4 to 7 when they are in nursery. So you're looking at activities which they would do around in the school or in the nursery or after school club. And they would be things like running, climbing, cycling, hopping, skipping, essentially any sort of physical activity that they would do outside, when they are with amongst other children or similar kind of age group of children, then those would also need to be discussed, because in some cases, we do a risk assessment sometimes when we are looking at planning these activities for children. And if specifically children are involved in that activity, then teachers are required to take risk assessment of certain activities which are going to be performed for the first time. If they're going to a new place or a new area where this activity is going to be performed, somebody does visit from the school or from the nursery and ensures that we do a risk assessment to see if there are any dangers, any places or any such objects which could harm the child, or if they need to be cordoned off in a way so that it does not produce any sort of injury to the child, and that would be covered under, say, risk assessment. So here, as a basic bit in terms of physical care of children that we need to do, we need to look at specifically routines that children would be needing to get into, and these routines would be in their home, or I would say different types of environments. And in such cases, when we talk about different types of environments, what we are going to be looking at is we would classify them as, say, nutritional requirements. So children can obviously be given lots of different things to eat, but one of the key things during the early years of development is to look at nutritional or balanced food, which would be balanced in terms of proteins, vitamins, fats, carbohydrates, so that it allows the child and it's aids the child in its growth and development. So things like your hair, your brain, your bones, your body structure, which are all growing in the early years, they would require what is called a balanced nutritional requirement. And that would be classed as one such physical need. So as parents, as carers, as early as practitioners, we would need to ensure that the food that is given to the children is a balanced diet, which is rich in, say, fruits, vegetables, proteins, whole grains, which is crucial for their initial development as a child, their body structure and the development of their body structure and other vital organs in the body. And that is where we would need to be specifically careful about their physical needs between the age group of 2 to 5. Now, sometimes we look at children in the young years, their diet in terms of calcium for the growth of bones and, for development of bones is also important. So there's focus on, carbohydrates and milk in particular, and that is to ensure that, they are given this in good quantity, which allows their physical growth and development to happen. The second, if I have to put it in terms of physical care needs, and if I categorize that, would be, say, physical activity. You would generally see that, kids, when they are born and they are inactive, slowly and gradually, as they start to pick up their motor skills, you would generally see that their physical activity starts to grow. And because they are not burning any calories, and everything that they are getting in terms of little bit of solid food and milk is all going into becoming energy and obviously helping in the growth and development of the body. And at some stage, when they start to crawl, and then crawling leads to walking, or standing first, and then standing and holding objects to walk, and after that walking, wherein they're able to find their balance, what you will generally see is that some of these activities, when the child starts walking, would be classed into what are called physical care needs, but they will be classed under what are called physical activities. And these physical activities, again, are going to be quite paramount and important, because they would be contributing towards, say, the cardiovascular fitness. They would be looking at helping the child develop strength when they try and lift objects, or, push objects, or, for example, in general, do any sort of physical activity. And that this physical activity will also be mentally quite stimulating for them in terms of helping to drive their physical growth. And this is something that I would say, if I classify as physical activity and categorize it, this would be more important and pertinent between the age groups of 5 and 16 or 5 and 18. And this is primarily because most children will start off with some sort of moderate physical activity, but at some stage, this activity over a point in time, as they grow, as they become a teenager, or from a toddler, they become an adolescent, they go into adolescence, and then become a teenager, and then obviously become an adult at some stage. This physical activity can be on a varying scale and increase as with age and time, which would allow them to strengthen their muscles and obviously bones. And some of the activities that we generally get to see children from the age group of 5 to 11 performing more frequently would be jumping, running, than other sedentary activities which they were used to when they were a child, and they were only, in their room around the toys, couldn't walk, and they could only crawl. And some of these activities were dependent on the parents or the carer to be able to pick them up and transport them, or, pick them up and ask them to get into the car. But these things children start to do on their own, and I would categorize them as what are called physical activities. But the training for these physical activities and care needs tend to start quite early. And that is where we look at parents getting into this routine and training the child to be able to understand, what is good for them, what is not good for them, and how they should go about and, approach some of these activities. Now, one of the other things that we'll also look at in particular would be, talking about physical care needs. But in this case, we'll be talking about, say, hygiene needs. So when I look at hygiene needs, and I would look at some sort of training which parents would start to do, or, start to get children to understand in the age group of, say, 2 to 5, would be to look at nappy changing, and obviously, doing away with the nappy altogether. And that would lead into what is called toilet training, so that they know when they need to wee, when they need to, go and do their business. In those cases, they would essentially sound off an alarm, or obviously sound you in particular as a carer, as a parent, as somebody who's taking care of them, to say that I need to go, and, or I need this. And that would be the beginnings of how they would get into this particular habit. And I know that a lot of us, when we look at parenting, we are given guidance and, guidelines to ensure that, children at the certain age, when they are young, if they are not well, we need to do sponging to ensure that they are, keeping for the purposes of hygiene. And in some cases, when they are sick, or in some cases when they start to grow, then you lead them into a bath, or essentially make sure that they are maintaining their personal hygiene, and that tends to be by looking at developing the activity of washing and bathing as a structured activity, around which the child tends to then mentally understand that, okay, evening times between such and such, although they can't keep track of exact time, but they would know that, okay, now it's time to go and have a bath, or now it's time to go and have a wash, and things like that. And they are going to be related to the physical and physical care needs which the children need. Now, some of them would also develop into what is called needs, which are primarily related to, I would say, you know, um, rest and sleep as well. So children at some point in time would know, and their body would give them some sort of a signal to say, now it's time to rest, now it's time to go to sleep. And if in some cases we do find that children do not follow these fixed patterns of resting and sleeping, then in those cases children can be deprived of sleep. That could affect their mood, behavior, and some of their cognitive skills and physical health, and that would be detrimental for the growth and development of the child. So generally, there is a prescription given, or some sort of information given to parents to say children between the age group of 0 to 2 should look at 10 to 13 hours of sleep. Children between the age group of 2 to 5 should look at 9 to 11 hours of sleep. And children between the age group of, say, 5 to 7 should look at least 8 hours of sleep and beyond. And those tend to be what are called, critical, let's say, routines which the physical care needs will help develop in children, and they would be related to, I would say, rest and sleep patterns which the child would use and understand, and then get used to over a point in time as they even grow up to become an adult. And they would become a basic part of, the activities that they do in some cases. But the beginnings of that, from where they understand and how they understand, tends to happen at the early age, when parents start building these routines of sleeping and getting up, or sleeping or taking rest, and that then matures slowly and gradually into habits which children are able to independently carry off as they become from children to teenagers to adults. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
No, not yet. Thanks.
Okay, now there are some activities that we need to look at in terms of understanding, okay, what would be the process of why is it that nappy training is a physical care need. So when we look at nappy training, and when we look at this as a physical care need, what we need to be able to do is, obviously, that children would be able to do a change of their nappy on their own. But over the years, changes in technology and obviously development has led to nappies being like boxer shorts as well, which allows children to slip them on. And sometimes if children's are not, or a child is not taken off this particular process, and they do not, let's say the toilet training part of the process is delayed, and children don't understand this, that you would see probably children in the age group of 3, 4, even 5 sometimes are still wearing nappies. And that is, not ideal. So in some cases, what you would generally see that parents would start talking to children about doing away with the nappy. They would start to build, say, start talking to them by role plays, to say that if you need to go during the night, you need to get up, you need to, say, for example, make a noise, stand up on the cot, or, some sort of basic reaction that you would ask. They would need to be giving the parents to be able to help them out, to be able to go across and use say, for example, toilet facilities, or facilities which they would need essentially to become and do away with nappy altogether. So washing of the hands after say, for example, going to the toilet is something. After each nappy change, practitioners obviously would, I would put it this way, two sides of the coin. So if practitioners, parents, carers, people who are working with children essentially do this, they also need to take care of their personal hygiene, ensure that they wash their hands, ensure that they're using a disinfectant, and in such cases, disposing of the nappy, if the nappy has been changed in a nappy sack and then it's been put across into a correct bin, or put across a side in a way wherein it does not create further, I would say, spread of any sort of disease or infection. But on the other side, when we look at parents and children altogether, they would be also following the same routine, but obviously there would be a bit of a bond and interaction when nappy changings or nappy changes, the process is being done, and you would normally take them to a change area. Sometimes you see disabled toilets also have what are called nappy changing facilities. So parents can pull across a small bed if the child is between the age group of 0 and 2 and use that as a facility to be able to change the nappy. But there are bits and pieces that parents are aware of, that they need to use tissues or wipes, wet wipes, to be able to clean the bum, and obviously ensure that they put the pseudo creme or some sort of a creme on to ensure that there is no possibility of infection. In some cases, it is recommended you wash it off. And those are the basic bits which parents would also follow. And at some stage, these things would then be passed on to children to be able to understand that if you do go, then you need to wash your hands. You need to make sure that you're, maintaining some personal hygiene. And they would be procedures or processes which would essentially help in preventing the spread of any disease or any sort of infections. One of the physical training needs that we also talk about is that during the age group of 2 to 5, children will also undergo vaccination. And there are different types of vaccinations which children will get depending on, the country or the area that they're in. But generally speaking, in the UK, they would typically be getting the MMR vaccine. They'll be getting a flu jab vaccine. And in some cases, if your ancestral history has certain, let's say, it has certain reminiscence of certain type of say diseases which are not there in developed countries now, for example polio, smallpox. Then in those cases children would also be given those vaccines which would help them develop immunity, and over a point in time be seen as preventive measures which are going to promote the general well-being of the child. And in some cases these preventive measures would essentially be related to physical care. And that would mean practitioners, nurses, or doctors, or parents would need to monitor the growth and development and the prevention of these diseases via vaccinations which are given at the early stages, so that the child's development during the early years is not affected by any adverse condition or any sickness or any kind of disease. And this would also highlight that when we look at the holistic development of a child, physical care needs tend to be comprehensive. They require, I would say, a lot of attention from parents. They require attention from caregivers and healthcare professionals in general, which are involved. And if all of them are aware of the physical care needs of a child when the child is still developing these habits and routines, it will inform and obviously support the overall development of the child, thereby laying a foundation for a very healthy and fulfilling life. And in those cases, these routines that we talk about, which parents, carers, healthcare professionals, nurses, midwives, depending on the age group when they get involved with, would help in developing healthcare and hygiene, rest and sleep patterns, ensuring there is a balance between the physical activity which the child needs to do in order to develop the motor skills, and then the balanced food, or I'll put it this way, the nutritious balanced food which is required to be had specifically when children are growing up between the age group of 2 and 5, becomes the fundamental foundation that the physical care needs are required for children to be able to have a normal phase of development in the early years. And that is what this particular, I would say, learning outcome is all about. Is that okay?
Yes, thanks.
So what we need to do as a bit of a summary for this particular session is to look at how we can categorize, how we can identify and define physical care needs for children. What are the various categories that we can group them into? Things like physical activity, hygiene, rest and sleep patterns, nutritional diet, and obviously preventive measures which could be taken by either healthcare professionals, parents, caregivers, or anybody who's involved in the development of the child in the early years. And last but not the least, we need to be able to look at some of the practical examples of things like nappy changing. So when you talk about nappy changing, it's a routine part which the child would need to go through in the early years in order to maintain hygiene and obviously comfort. And this would be done by obviously making sure that adequate changes of nappies are done from time to time, while taking care of ensuring that wipes are there. I would say if somebody, apart from the parents, are doing it, sometimes you would see that carers and healthcare professionals would obviously wear gloves and masks to ensure that there is no spread of infection. But at the same time, this is to prevent any spread of infection as well. And they would ensure that timely checks are done to see, does the nappy change, is the nappy change required? Are nappies, for example, put on for too long, wherein it sometimes leads to the development of rashes and infections. And sometimes then GPs and doctors recommend that we end up using pseudocreme along with wet wipes, because the areas sometimes can remain very damp. And because of the damp and the wetness, not damp essentially, but wetness, these can develop, infections. And that is where proper hygiene and cleaning is required. And when we talk about certain activities like, you know, care activities which are required in the early physical years, so we also talk about toilet training, and there is obviously um, significant, steps have to be taken by parents and carers in particular to be able to help develop this habit and routine within the child. And this tends to be when the child is asked to understand the signs that they would need to show for readiness in terms of going to the toilet or going for a wee. And that would be helpful, because in this case, the parents would need to encourage the child to go through that process wherein they're able to, successfully diagnose that, okay, yes, I'm a tad late. Sometimes what happens is when you see, yes, I want to go and use the toilet or I want to go and wee, but parents do not realize that the child has pretty much no time, or has only sounded the alarm that they need to go to the toilet only at the last moment. So by the time sometimes you're taking the child on, you see that they start weeing inside their pants or their trousers itself. And that is where the training tends to come in. And what we look at is, what parents, carers, healthcare professionals are essentially looking at building is a consistent approach, which would be looking at understanding the time frame in which the child actually raises an alarm for this activity to happen, and how long after the alarm has been raised that they would essentially go ahead and release, which would mean that the carer, the healthcare professional, the parents, the teachers, anybody who's working with that child would know that from the time the alarm is raised to the time this actually activity happens, they would need to rush it through, or they would need to help the child create some time, perfect that timing so that they're able to hold it before they reach the toilet. And in some cases, information is provided which allows them to avoid any confusion. And in most cases, in schools, nurseries, you would normally see that when toilet training is being done, there is an effective use of child-friendly toilets. You would normally see the toilet seats and urinals to be at a lower position or in a convenient position, wherein they are designed and obviously adapted for children to be able to use them, and for them to be able to easily manage things like flushing. The handles tend to be quite gentle and broad. You generally see certain adaptations which are done within these facilities, and they would then help the child undergo this physical care or training, which will be termed as what is called toilet training. And I think we can similarly elaborate on, washing and bathing time, care of skin, teeth, and hair, and obviously meal timings, which parents, work quite hard. Dinner ladies, I know, and then teachers work quite hard to be able to build with children in particular, to ensure that, they are in effect understanding that this is how they would go about, and this time is when they would essentially be fed. This is the time when they would essentially get the meal, and this is the time essentially when they would need to leave the activities that they are doing, and then come onto the table to be able to have a meal with some of their friends or siblings or, you know, other members in the family. And this part, which requires this deep understanding to be developed with the needs of children and the ability in terms of how they would need this physical care, both in terms of, you know, health and safety, but also in the form of well-being, is what the practitioners would significantly contribute towards when we talk about physical care and physical care which is provided to children in the early years. And this then allows the development of what is called healthy habits or routines, which will stay with the child for a lifetime. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Any questions on today's session? So that basically helps us summarize what we are discussing for learning outcome 2, which focuses on understanding the, you know, physical care needs of the children.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Good stuff. So what I will do is I'm going to try and you know, get a login to one of the sites called Twinkle, TWINKL. And that particular site has, I think it is not a free site. You can get some free resources, but there are lots of activities on this particular site that we can access. So I'm going to try and get a subscription for it today or tomorrow. And then I'm going to download some of the key concepts which are available as posters. And they would be useful for you to, you know, one, go through and read. And second, they would be useful for you to include as evidence, you know, specifically in your assignments for Unit 2, because for Unit 2, essentially, when we look at some of the concepts, these concepts require activities to be elaborated. Now, you might not need to do elaboration on all the activities that I've discussed today. Like, for example, we've discussed, you know, nappy training or toilet training, nappy changing, toilet training, you know, physical activities, rest and sleep, care of hair, you know, health and hygiene. But one or two of such activities would be required to be, you know, discussed during, you know, some of your, let's say, evidence creation that you do when you start doing your assignment. And I think those posters or charts would be quite helpful. So I will try and get them, you know, downloaded after signing a subscription, and hopefully they should be then available on Moodle by close of play, you know, tomorrow. And I will drop a message on the WhatsApp group to say that, okay, this now is available, and that would allow you to essentially go in and, you know, check some of those out.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Good stuff. So I'll catch up with you next week, and next week we're going to be discussing learning outcome 4. Until then, take care, and I will then hopefully, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email, and I'll come back to you with additional reading or, you know, handouts for those activity or questions that you have.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for attending today, Kate, and I will see you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next week.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thank you.